I'm Malkia Roberts. I'm a fashion and beauty photographer and have been in the industry for about 15 years. And I still come across photographers who don't know how to shoot different skin types. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, how to shoot different skin types. Now, there are various reasons why it's important to know how to shoot different skin types. I would go straight in with number one, being that for your sake, you need to show diversity in your portfolio to attract so many different clients, because it's not unheard of for a client to not see in your portfolio something that represents what they want you to capture and therefore disregard you as an option, as someone who can actually shoot it. You need to be able to show and demonstrate that you can shoot what different clients want. I would say the number two reason is people are no longer accepting mediocrity. Now, there was a time, arguably there should never have been a time, but there was a time when you would go and get your photo taken and you would be, if you're fair skinned, perhaps completely overexposed. If you're dark skinned, you might have been just in a shadow on a black background, and the photographer really wouldn't have known what they were doing. And it's just not acceptable anymore. People are demanding more and they want the best image of themselves. And you need to know what you're doing and understand all the factors that come together to make a great photo in order to satisfy your client. A third and final reason I would give for needing to know how to shoot different skin types is, as a photographer, it's our job to bring out the best version of someone. Now, we have to arguably produce an even better image than what people see when they look in the mirror. That doesn't necessarily come from post-production and manipulation after an image. I'm talking about really understanding everything that comes together to make that great photograph, to bring out, yes, exactly the best version of someone.
That's good.
Right, let's get what I think is going to be the most unpopular part of this out the way, and that's understanding makeup. So it's not your area of expertise, but a lot can go wrong before you even start shooting if you don't involve yourself in the prep for the shoot. Now, your makeup artist may be from a theatre background, bridal background, and for them a key element is making sure that the makeup lasts all day, and that can be several layers of foundations, primers, fixers afterwards. All these different layers to making the makeup last all day is actually counterproductive when it comes to shooting different skin types and shooting skin, because actually a good photograph has the skin coming through the makeup. Rather than having the makeup cover the entire skin, it should just be a light coverage of foundation, and the skin should be able to breathe and come through, and you should be able to pick that up on your camera. So just advise your makeup artist that rather than the primers, the mattifiers, the fixers, just a light coverage, a light base is exactly what you need to shoot skin. Another important factor for makeup is, it seems obvious, but makeup artists still get it wrong, is the color needs to match the skin. You need to be able to look at the makeup that they have applied and be able to tell the makeup artist whether it's a good match or not. If it's not a good match and the makeup artist seems slightly out of their depth, then you'll need to, I would suggest, go as far as say, let's shoot without foundation. It is better to have no foundation than to have the wrong foundation color, to have heavy foundation. I don't really need to explain why. It comes off on your images and it really, really can ruin your images. So let's get into camera settings. I will usually use the same settings when I'm shooting in the studio. That's an ISO of 100, shutter speed 1/125, aperture 5.6. usually, and that's on my Canon 5D Mark III and using an 85mm 1.8. That's my chosen kit and my chosen settings. I very rarely vary those. And I'm not going to get too much into what the settings actually mean. There are a lot of great tutorials to understand camera settings if you're shooting on manual mode, which ideally you should be. The main thing that I'll focus on is my aperture, because I think that that's important when shooting skin to understand why. So I use 5.6 because I like to capture details on various parts of the face and also the skin. I love to show the detail in the skin. Now, other photographers may go down as shallow as 3.2 because they like the effect of having just the nose, the eyes, the lips in focus, and having a bit of a blur on the skin. But I choose to have everything in focus. The only time when I will go down to about a 3.2 is if the skin isn't too smooth. So if the model has maybe some spots or some imperfections that I want to hide, then I might go down to 3.2. And that's a massive help in post-production, and when it comes to skin smoothing. Shooting at a shallower depth of field does help, but those are the basic camera settings that I will use when I'm shooting portraiture, fashion, beauty. The next setting that we're going to talk about is when it comes to setting color, white balance. I would say don't rely on auto white balance because your camera's auto settings are taking an average of everything that's in the frame, and that's hair, that's wardrobe, that's the background, any accessories that you may have on your model. It will take those all into consideration, jumble those up together and give you an average for what they think the color, for what your camera thinks the color should be. I would say to shoot with manual color settings because this allows you to prioritize skin. So really give consideration to the colors in the skin and how you can bring those out the best with setting your color manually. Also, when you set your camera to auto white balance, you'll find that image number 1 will have different colors to image number 10. It won't be consistent and it will keep on changing. So best to set manually. So something you'll get to know about the way that I work, if you haven't realized that by now already, is that I don't believe in hard and fast rules when it comes to photography. I believe in style guides and that you can have a different style of photography and really make something your own. And I have a style myself that I'm trying to guide you through. So one thing when it comes to my style is I believe in contrasting. So you can have darker skins that you're shooting, which have a lot of reds and orange undertones to them. And you can either use gold reflectors and in your colors on your white balance, try and bring out those oranges and reds, but I choose to contrast them and cool them off a little bit. So I'll have a bit more cyan in my white balance when I'm shooting darker skin tones, and I'll use the silver side of my reflector to again cool off the tones, and the result is just a cooler feel, which I prefer because I believe there's already enough red and orange and magentas in the undertones of the skin. Now, that also transfers to when I'm shooting fairer tones. So with fairer tones, I find that I see, and they're more susceptible to a lot of blues and picking up and reflecting a lot of blues. So I try and use warmer colors, and I will use reds and I will use the gold side of my reflector when I'm shooting those skin tones. Because colors are so important when it comes to skin, I would choose a space with very few other colors that are going to bounce into your skin and reflect. So I usually use a space, if you are using a home studio, with white walls or dark walls, and those sort of, monochrome colors will do more justice to the skin that you're shooting. Now, also, when it comes to choosing a backdrop, again, this is not a rule. This is just something that I think looks better. If I'm shooting fairer skin and blonde hair, I'm not going to have a white or really light background. I'll choose deeper tones and darker colors. And on the contrary, when I'm shooting darker skin, I'm not going to have a black background. I tend to have whites, light grays and lighter colors if I'm shooting dark skin, dark hair. That allows the skin to really stand out from the background. Of course, this is using a one light setup. You can use a two light setup and direct one of your lights to the background to separate the background from the foreground. However, I feel like that only does so much in terms of light. But when it comes to color, I think that it's always good to have a contrasting color when you are shooting skin tones. So let's talk exposure. It's easy to get exposure wrong, and the problem with exposure is it's something that's not easily naturally fixed in post-production. So if you do try and alter your exposure too much, it shows that you've done a lot of post-production, and it's very difficult if you have an overexposed image to pull back that detail that overexposure loses. So I feel that when I'm shooting fairer skin, my preference is to underexpose ever so slightly because there's a risk of overexposing fairer skin, and when you overexpose fair skin, you lose the detail. Whereas if you underexpose slightly in post-production, it's actually quite easy to increase the highlights that kind of bring that nice contrast that make a beautiful image. And when it comes to shooting darker skin, I try to overexpose ever so slightly again for two reasons. First of all, because you can afford to overexpose without losing detail in the highlighted areas. And also because I actually think it's quite beautiful when you have the contrast between the teeth and the eyes on dark skin and you brighten those, and it just makes the image so much more beautiful. So if you can, ever so slightly under or overexpose your image depending on, and the key is ever so slightly, because again, if you have an overexposed image, then the skin detail is completely lost and it doesn't make as great an image. And the same if you underexpose, you can easily just cast your model or your subject in the shadows, and it doesn't bring out the beautiful contrast that's there in deeper skin. So, light setup. With light setup, you can be quite flexible in how you choose to light your subject. You can use two lights, even sometimes people use three lights. I use for most of my shoots one light. This is because when I started, I was shooting a lot in a home studio. Now with a smaller space, it's quite difficult to get two lights in to work effectively. So I started off with one light. But you can use two lights and make the subject stand out more from the background. It's completely up to you. For this particular shoot, I used one light, Godox AD600 Pro. Sometimes if budget is an issue as well, I would recommend investing in one great light than having two mediocre lights. So you can use the typical modifiers that people use for the sort of close-up portrait photography is a beauty dish or an octobox. So for this, I used an octabox with a grid. The grid gives your light more direction, or you can use a beauty dish, which I also do use sometimes. And again, the beauty dish, because it's a smaller modifier, if you just imagine, an octabox is like this big, and all of the light is coming in like this. Beauty dish is more like this, and it has more direction to your light, and it is more beautiful and gives beautiful catch lights. If you are using a beauty dish, I would say use a triflector or a curved reflector so that you also get some light falling on the sides of the face. That's more flattering, and it makes the subject stand out again a bit more from the background. It just gives you an extra dimension so your image isn't as flat. With an octabox, I didn't really need to do that because it's such a big modifier. The light was also falling on the sides of the face, and I also tend to bring that out slightly in post-production. I will use my dodge tool to emphasize the light on the sides of the face. A great way to gauge your light is to keep your model light turned on. As you can see, I had my model light turned on when I was shooting this model, and that allowed me to see the shadows before I actually started shooting. So model light on is a good way to sort of see how your image is going to turn out before you start shooting. I hope all of that has been useful for you. Practice, practice, practice. There are a lot of people who are willing to do test shoots, a lot of actors, actresses. So practice your lighting technique, and don't be afraid to shoot different skin types. If you aren't so confident, you can let them know exactly what you're trying to learn. And even your models, sometimes through their experience, may have feedback for you in terms of what they've experienced when it comes to different photographers. But just remember your pre-production, the makeup, make sure the makeup artist gets it right, and guide them through that. Make sure you have the right settings that you need, your camera settings. Make sure you understand your camera, whether it brings out more magentas, more cyans, and make sure that you have a tethering tool to guide you if you're not sure about the LCD display on your camera, that it's too reliable. So get your settings right. Also get your lighting right. Understand the lighting modifier that you're using, understand the science of the light. And that doesn't mean the formula. Understanding the science of the light is just understanding how different modifiers work, how light falls on the face. Make sure you get that right. And at the end of the day, we have to do a great job for our models, for our clients. There's a lot more diversity out there now in terms of who the clients are bringing to us and who the clients are themselves as well. So keep up with the times. Learn to shoot different skin types. It's something that you won't regret once you've grasped.